A reading from the first letter of Paul to the Corinthians. Brothers and sisters, Jews demand signs and Greeks look for wisdom, but we proclaim Christ crucified, a stumbling block to Jews and foolishness to Gentiles. But to those who are called, Jews and Greeks alike, Christ, the power of God and the wisdom of God. For the foolishness of God is wiser than human wisdom, and the weakness of God is stronger than human strength. The word of the Lord.
Our second reading for this Sunday comes from the first letter of Paul to the Corinthians. In the first reading, we saw how the commandments, the so-called 10 commandments, are really rooted in God who is love, and out of love for His people, Israel liberated them from the slavery in Egypt. So these commandments are not an added repression or oppression. God who liberates will not lead His people back to oppression. The commandments come from the God of love and are a way of keeping love alive, love of God and love of neighbor. Now, in the second reading, that love of God has become incarnate. This love for God and for neighbor happens in a singular form in the person of Jesus Christ. And Jesus crucified, Jesus hanging on the cross, offering His life out of love for the Father and out of love for us sinful sinners. This is the image of God who is love and who frees us from sin and all forms of slavery. So the commandments that we talked about in the first reading now have become a living person who later on will tell us that the greatest commandments could be summarized into two: love of God and love of neighbor. Jesus crucified. Now, according to St. Paul, the crucified Christ is not acceptable to many. Many people, especially the Jewish people, would look at Jesus crucified as a scandal. That's why He was crucified, because He was causing a scandal. He was not a good Jew. He was not a good citizen. He was not a good follower of the temple rules. He is a scandal. And for the Gentiles, for the so-called pagans, Jesus crucified is an absurdity. It's a foolishness. They probably will say, what did this person do? Why did he not manage his life well so that he could have avoided this horrible type of death, being crucified? So for us to say, He is the love of God. He is God freeing us from sin and slavery while He is hanging on the cross. The Jews will say, oh no, this cannot be God. He is a scandal. And the Gentiles will say, no, this is not the love of God. This is absurdity. That man is plainly foolish. That's why he ended up on the cross. But St. Paul says, for us, and this is true especially of us, as we prepare for the Holy Week celebration, when we behold the crucified Jesus, what do we see in Him? Not a scandal, not an absurdity, but we find in Him the power of the love of God and the wisdom of the love of God. Jesus is the personification of the love that is underneath the commandments of love of God and neighbor. Yes, in Jesus, living out the love of God and love of neighbor could appear scandalous and absurd to those who do not believe in Him. My dear brothers and sisters, try it out. Try to follow Jesus. Try to follow the commandments of love. And I'm sure some people will find you absurd. Some people will laugh at you. Some people might even be scandalized at your pure love. And they will tell you, come on, be real. As though you are becoming artificial because of your love. But for those who know God and those who believe in God, every crucified Christ, every crucified member of Christ, out of love, out of a remembrance of the God who loves and liberates us, is truly the power of God and the wisdom of God. So, dear brothers and sisters, be the manifestation of love in our world.